What's going on, guys? This is Matt from DNR Auto coming here live. We're going to try this live YouTube thing. We haven't tried it out yet, so we're giving it a shot right now. Today, we're going to discuss O2 sensors. I did a little video on our Facebook page, and I figured why not go ahead and hop on YouTube, do the same thing. Don't want to leave you guys out, excuse me. So I need some Monster. Because today is Tuesday, it's actually our Monday because Monday was the 1st, so Happy New Year to everybody. Today I want to sit down and talk about O2 sensors. So here we've got an O2 sensor. This is an O2 sensor for a 2014-ish Camaro SS 6.2 LS3. So we've got the LS3. It's actually in a completely other vehicle, It's in a Jeep Wrangler. But we were having some issues, so I wanted to kind of discuss what issues we were having, what the O2 sensors do, how we came to our conclusion, and everything else. So if you guys are not familiar, O2 sensors, oxygen sensors, in their bare basic form, I guess we could say the most simplistic way to describe what O2 sensors do is O2 sensors read data of the air and fuel mixture that comes out of your motor. So essentially, these are plugged into the exhaust. You've got an upstream and you've got a downstream O2 sensor. Now, in some cases, like, in V8, 6 cylinders, whatever, you've got two. You've got a left and a right side, upstream and downstream. Occasionally, there's a third O2 sensor in there. Don't worry about that. You probably won't ever experience that, at least not working on LS stuff, I believe, anyway. So let's talk about what they do. They read data from the motor about the fuel and air mixture that is coming out of the motor. So essentially, air goes into the motor, fuel is injected into the motor, and it comes out, and those numbers give you an air-fuel ratio, if you will, that these sensors read, and then it makes corrections based on what it sees. Does it need more fuel? Does it need less fuel? Is it getting too much air and it needs fuel to compensate? Is it giving it way too much fuel and we need to back it down? Whatever. The computer automatically handles this for you in a fuel-injected system. This is the beauty of fuel injection. This is what makes it what it is versus, old carburetors. Carburetors, you just adjust them. You get what you get, and it is what it is. So that's the beauty of fuel injection, is the computer being able to make these on-the-spot corrections for you and adjustments, so that way your vehicle is running as good. Typically, it's there for, making sure that the catalytic converter is functioning properly. So now you guys have a basic kind of understanding of what happens. The exhaust comes out of the head, it's into the header. It's going to hit the upstream O2 sensor. It's going to read that data and say, hey, we need more or less fuel. It's going to run through the catalytic converter, and then after the catalytic converter is going to be the downstream O2 sensor, where it says, yes, the catalytic converter is doing its job, and we'll say filtering this, air and exhaust properly, and that's working fine. So now we've got that sorted. We understand what they all do. Here's some of the issues. O2 sensors, along with a lot of other sensors on a motor, are hypersensitive. Like, these are what I call like the scary ones. And what I mean by that is they are super, super sensitive to things, and you don't want to mess with them. So generally speaking, you may have to, from time to time, depending on your application or what you're doing, you may have to extend your O2 sensor, to get it to a place where it can reach. I do not recommend cutting the wires and extending the wires. They're very sensitive to the resistance in the wires and stuff like that, and it can cause you a whole bunch of trouble, and you'll be scratching your head forever trying to figure out what's wrong with it, when all it is just that you shouldn't have cut the wires and extended them. If you can, I always recommend using a plug-in extension. Typically, typically the resistance and everything is accounted for and done for properly in a plug-in extension versus you cutting the wires open and trying to do it yourself. That can be said for a lot of sensors on the motor. We're not going to get into specific motor sensors and everything else, but generally speaking, there are times when you can cut wires and extend, and there's times where you really shouldn't. The O2 sensors is definitely one of those times where I feel like you really should not do that. Another thing, this gentleman here, this vehicle was just built. It was a crate LS3, brand new, dropped in. O2 sensors were brand new in the vehicle, everything else, and a mess of issues we've been having with the vehicle because it was dropped into a Jeep and we did not do the install. Somebody brought it to us, said, hey, I did all this work, I need you guys to get me, from 90% to 100% the rest of the way. you know, little do people know, usually that last 10% is the hardest 10%, especially if you didn't build it. If we built it, it'd be one thing, but when you don't build something, you have to kind of figure out what somebody else has done and figure out all the issues. It can be a headache from time to time. But one of the issues that we were having after we got a bunch of the other ones sorted out is a rich condition in Bank 2. I believe this came from Bank 2. So you guys will see that if you ever read codes or diagnose or anything or plug in a scanner, you'll see Bank 1 or Bank 2. You have to look at the manufacturer specifications, but all that means is one side or the other. Like Bank 1 may be left and Bank 2 may be right. So you'll have Bank 2 sensor 1, which is upstream, and sensor 2, which is downstream, or Bank 1 sensor 1, which is upstream, and Bank 1 sensor 2, which is downstream. So we were having an issue with a rich condition and the motor running and it believing it was throwing code for rich condition. So because it's relatively simple for us, we have a lift, we have a bunch of tools, you know, things are a little bit easier for us to do. We said, hey, let's go ahead and take the upstream O2 sensors and swap them, because if the code switches sides, we know we've got a dead O2 sensor and it's not a problem with the tune. I will say that 9 times out of 10 people will come to us and say, hey, I think there's a problem with the tune. It's usually not the tune. 90% of the time, the tune is fine. It is some kind of other mechanical or electronic failure that is causing the issue, and the tune itself is actually fine. But there were some things we did have to do to this tune specifically just because of the application. And it was more like good housekeeping stuff and, you know, numbers and equations and blah, 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 blah. But runs fine and everything else. So we were going to go ahead and swap this over and see if the code changed places. What we found, though, this is going to be very hard for you guys to see, but if I put it against my forehead here, you'll see, you see those lumps on there? Those lumps on this O2 sensor are actually weld splatter. So what happened is they had the O2 sensors in when they welded and created this fully custom exhaust. Very bad idea. As much as these sensors are hypersensitive, now we've got weld splatter on the sensor, inside the little ports in the sensor, everything else. And when we put this out, instead of going ahead and swapping it side to side, we realized that we probably shouldn't do that. We should just go ahead and buy a new one, because this one's probably shit. So, little tech tip for the day. If you guys are going to be welding exhaust, or if you're actually going to be welding the O2 sensor bungs into your exhaust, or whatever you're doing, always use an old sensor. And the reason I say that is you can not put the sensor in, which is fine, but that weld splatter that's right there may end up on the threads of the O2 sensor bung and cause you a little bit of headache down the road. Best thing to do is, you know, wherever you get it from, if it's your old exhaust system or, you know, it doesn't really matter. If you can get an O2 sensor or whatever will thread into the hole and hold, you know, and plug that hole up, go ahead and use an old O2 sensor or a bolt. Are we still live? This is my impressed face with YouTube Live right now. It's now reconnected me twice and caused me a bunch of headache. But like I was saying before, use an old O2 sensor or stick a bolt or whatever threads in there properly. Go ahead and put that in before you start welding on the exhaust or the O2 sensor bung itself. It's going to save you a lot of time and headache. You know, like this here is like a $90-something sensor. So could have saved yourself $90-something. You know, the owner of the vehicle didn't do this. He brought it to an exhaust place, which shall remain unnamed because I don't even know what it is, but brought it to an exhaust place, and now because they decided to leave this sensor in while they were welding, the weld splatter has contaminated this sensor and caused a malfunction. Now, I'm not 100%, but I'm about 98% sure that when we go ahead and get the brand new O2 sensor in, that it's going to go ahead and fix the problem. Funny story about that, because we're sitting here talking and I actually have the replacement O2 sensor here, and my master tech walked in and said, hey, I just want you to see this before I go ahead and open this bag. And I said, okay, what's that? He said, the O2 sensor came in, right? This material here, this copper gasket maker, Never-Seez, whatever the hell it is that they've included with the brand new O2 sensor has opened in there, and you would have never have known because it came in the box that way, and they didn't know, so it's not my parts supplier's fault. They're all good. Just shit happens. But now all of this shit is all inside this sensor. So now here's a prime example. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Sometimes parts come out of the box shit. This one The part maybe not shit, but because it's been now cut open, you know, because that tube has been cut open and all this stuff is in there, why even chance it? Because I know what's going to happen. We're going to try and clean it off. We're going to put it in. We're going to have problems with it. We're going to warranty it out, and we're going to get a new one anyway. So instead, save yourself a headache and get the new one. But because some people don't believe me, parts do come brand new out of the box, like complete shit. And here's one. So now we had an O2 sensor that was the last one on the shelf, and now they got to order, and we may not get it till this afternoon or tomorrow. But go ahead and check your parts. That's a good thing in there as well. Go ahead and take time to check your parts and make sure that you guys check everything out before you install it. So just in review today we talked about O2 sensors. The basic form, you know, their basic function, what is upstream, what is downstream, how it works with the catalytic converter. This is also why it's very important to have proper testing before you just go ahead and throw a catalytic converter at something. You know, make sure you're testing it right. Make sure it's not just an O2 sensor acting up. I mean, it's very possible that hey, after a long time, the live is back. Unfortunately, not very impressed with this YouTube live thing because it's now kicked me off like 3 times to reconnect. So I'm not even sure how much of this information you guys have got. But in conclusion, make sure you guys are testing your systems properly. If you don't know how to test your system properly, bring it to a certified mechanic that knows how to test the system properly. You don't want to be throwing catalytic converters at something when it just needs an O2 sensor. It's very possible that when your catalytic converter goes bad because of what is outputting from the catalytic converter, that it can burn up the downstream O2 sensors as well. LLC.com. That's our web store. There's also a link to, you know, the page talking about the shop and everything else. So make sure you